Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tara Tarango. Thanks you so much for joining me on this Wednesday afternoon. I really love this topic and thinking about critical thinking, so I'm delighted that maybe you do too, and that's why you're here, and excited to share some ideas with you. And I think particularly, you just have to address the elephant in the room of what a difficult school year we're all having. And whether it's bus routes that should take 15 minutes are now taking 2 hours because we have one school bus driver, or you're never teaching the same, getting through your curriculum because you never have a full class because they're always out, and the contact tracing, all the shortages. I just want to say I see you, I feel it too, and I think what doesn't change through all of that, even though we're stretched so thin, is our love for our students and our desire to help them be the best thinkers that they can be. And so that's why I wanted to do this webinar. Maybe I don't mean to dismiss all that other stuff. It's real. I see you, I feel it. But hopefully we can take a little bit of time here to think about ways to infuse critical thinking, particularly in our English language arts and social studies areas. As I think that we often think about critical thinking with science and with math, but kind of bringing that into that deeper level thinking, critical thinking, and analytical thinking with ELA and social studies, I think can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. So I want to give you some real practical ideas to do that. So thank you for joining me. Hopefully that helps you too. I'm thinking also, I just can't even get through curriculum, right? Because I can never get my full class there without somebody being absent. So something like these ideas and strategies that you can do on critical thinking, I think are perennial. They can happen anytime, no matter how many of your class you have on any given day. So I want to first get some logistics out of the way for you. I wanted to let you know that all the different, links to the different graphic organizers that I mentioned or things like that are in this resource HyperDoc handout. So there is a link there, and I think Robin, who I'll introduce in a second, is putting that in the chat room. So if you are one who likes to take notes or follow along, all that information is there. Feel free to go ahead and pull that up. The next most frequent question we get is this being recorded? So yes, this is being recorded within by Friday for sure, but usually within a couple hours, you'll get an email with a link to the recording, and feel free to watch that again, share it with your friends, whatever you'd like to do with that. And as I promised, I wanted to introduce you to Robin. You want to say hi, Robin?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today.
Robin is our guru on the back end, helping to address any of those questions that come up in the, there's a place for you to do, it might say chat or it might say question depending on what platform you have, but those are kind of technical questions or things that you can pose, and she will be right there to help you through those. So wanted to let you know those are there. I also wanted to let you know about Blue Apple. This is kind of our sponsor for today's webinar. And if you at all are thinking about project-based learning, a way to really kind of engage your students in making the world a better place through cross-curricular content, but don't want to spend a ton of time planning those project-based learning units, which can take a ton of time, then you should really check out Blue Apple. And you get a 10% discount on those. Just use code webinar at the checkout. So I encourage you to check those out. Some really engaging stuff for your students. So before we get started here and sharing some of these critical thinking strategies, I want to know who is here. What grade levels are we talking to? I tried to give a smattering of examples across the board, but it's always helpful to know who's on here, and I can tailor it a little bit more. So Robin's launched that poll. If you will answer that, and she will check and see when the answers start to slow down and let us know the results.
All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds.
If this question's a hard one, I know it's the end of the day. Sometimes this is all you can do.
All right, results are in, and we are 43% middle school, okay, followed by 39% upper L, 26% high school, 17% early elementary, and then 9% admin or other.
Okay,
so mostly across the gamut.
Okay, yeah, mostly the upper and middle. Not quite as much on the early L, but I will show you examples, like I said, across the board. If you like a strategy, and I happen to share an early elementary example, but you're in middle school, shoot me an email. I would love to, and that's on that handout document. My email is there. If you have any questions on how to make this work for you, I want to make sure this hour is a good use of your time. So if your questions don't get answered here, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will help you apply those specifically. So we're going to talk briefly about why we want to make time for actual instruction in critical thinking. And I won't spend too much time on that because you're already here, so I feel like I don't necessarily need to sell you on that. But in case you need to sell parents or administrators on why you're doing these types of activities, I want to give you some fodder for that. But we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about specific strategies that you can use in English language arts and social studies. And then we'll end with some anytime strategies. So outside of that curriculum, like I said, you may not even be plowing through that curriculum as much as just getting whoever you have in the room, and maybe it's a transition time, or maybe it's just you have 5 minutes at the end of the day, things that you can do anytime to boost that critical thinking culture in your classroom. So we'll start with that why. I love this quote that I found. It says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So this is a futurist, whatever that means, Alvin Toffler. And I just thought that was kind of interesting that we always think about illiterate being, literacy being reading and writing, but really this ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, basically think critically about what it is we're hearing is really going to be what defines a literate person in the future. But bringing that a little bit closer to home and thinking about, I was looking at different examples that I've had working with students directly, or that my teacher friends have had working with their students, and to kind of show what it is we're trying to get to, right? So I have an elementary and a middle and a high school example here, but what do we mean when we say dig deeper? So see if this sounds familiar to you. In elementary, let's say you are looking at how do the words and phrases in this poem impact its meaning? That's a question you pose to your kids. How many of you have seen an answer like this at elementary? Well, they rhyme. How do the words and phrases in this poem impact its meaning? Well, they rhyme. What does that mean, right? What we really want is the rhymes feel like a song and it makes me feel happy, right? That's what I mean by digging deeper. You want that little bit of critical thinking, so you're really getting at how those words and phrases impact the meaning, not just they rhyme. Then I'll move on to high school here, right? You might have a vocabulary exercise, something very simple that we all do if we teach ELA. Use this vocabulary word, resolute, in a sentence. Well, how many of you have seen responses like this? They were resolute because they were determined, right? They just sort of picked the definition and put it right into their sentence. Versus something, it doesn't have to be super complex, but my resolute mother made me clean my room before I could leave for the movies, right? That was me to my daughter last night. But anyway, you can tell it's personal, it's something that is an experience that they have and it's contextualized. So that's adding that deeper level of thinking into that same exact prompt. And I'll show you one more middle school here. Let's say we're talking about kind of geography here, social studies, and we say we're looking at the standard, use maps, satellite images, or photos to explain the relationship between the locations of the US and Russia. US and the Russia. So I apparently need to go to ELA. Anyway, how many of you are used to getting something like this? Right, well, they used a map. They are showing the difference in locations. They colored them in, right? But there's no evidence of deeper thinking, right? Versus this kid, and God bless her, right? Who actually used a combination of map and the satellite photo here to really show you that, well, it depends on how you're looking at it. You could go across the ocean here. We've got 4,857 miles. We're an 11-hour flight. But the Bering Strait here is only 55 miles. And she even went on to kind of look up the fact that there's a Russian island and a US island that are only 2.5 miles apart. So that's a distance there within the Bering Strait. So again, digging deeper. It's not always just about more information, but more thoughtful information that really shows this student understood the geographic relationship and of the locations of these places. So, all right, we want to see those kinds of examples from our students. We all want them to think deeper like that. So again, thinking about why this is important, I want to make sure we know this is not a new concept, and I just thought this was kind of interesting. The first recorded notion of critical thinking comes from Socrates. And I went ahead, and I get the irony here that I'm quoting Wikipedia, and we'll talk about information literacy and reliable sources, but I just thought this was a great story and it was relevant today. So, and it was interesting about the origin of critical thinking. So I'll read this to you here. Socrates established the fact that one cannot depend upon those in authority to have sound knowledge and insight. He demonstrated that persons may have power and high position and yet be deeply confused and irrational. Does it sound familiar at all? Socrates maintained that for an individual to have a good life or to have one that is worth living, he must be a critical questioner and possess an interrogative soul. He established the importance of asking deep questions that probe profoundly into thinking before we accept ideas as worthy of belief. So we've heard of the Socratic method, but I think this fuller context of like saying that in order to be functioning members of society, we have to be critical thinkers. And like I said, I get the irony, but I do think it's about critical thinking. If Wikipedia has something that you can verify or sounds reasonable other places, I personally feel like it's a fine resource as long as you're able to match it with a little bit of critical thinking. So I did use that with a little bit of jest, but I thought that was kind of a fun story. So why do we need critical thinking? Well, we do live in this information age, right? There is tons of information. So it's less important that we know how to find information as it is that we know how to discern what information is credible and not in the information age, right? We all love this meme of Abraham Lincoln talking about the internet. How many of your kids would just pass this on as if they were interested, as if it was something perfectly true? I mean, I know I have had some of my students that would do that. So that ability to really just take a moment, does this make sense? In the information age that we live in is so critical. But also if we look to the future age, right? I saw this kind of referenced or kind of pulled together several thoughts that were, if we think about the fact that we're preparing students, we often hear we're preparing students for jobs that we don't know about, right? But it's more than that. We're preparing them to solve unforeseen problems with unknown technology and yet to be created careers. So we should be obsessing about critical thinking. Like we can't control the rest of these variables that we're preparing them for. So, but we know critical thinking is going to have to be a part of it. So we should really be making this a part of everything that we do. And if you don't believe any of those sources, you can get it straight from World Economic Forum. So they put out their list of essential job skills in the ever-changing world, and they have a top 10 list of skills that will be needed in 2025, which is not that far away. I think this was done in 2020, so it seemed like it was 5 years away, but now we're just a few years from that. But look how many in the top 10 are involving some level of critical thinking, right? Right there at the top, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning and learning strategies, that kind of metacognitive ability to learn how to learn, complex problem solving, critical thinking and analysis, right? Just go on down the list and you'll see this idea of critical thinking is something that employers of right now and of the future are going to be demanding for sure. And I think there's also this piece, this is kind of what Socrates was getting at, that strong critical thinkers, I mean, it's more than just having good career opportunities, right? I put that there in the middle, but they make better decisions, they're happier, have improved relationships, better, more informed citizens, right? This idea that it really, having these critical thinking skills can really shape the trajectory of your own mental health, your own happiness. I think that's a really strong notion, particularly in today's day and age where our kids have been through so much. And my last reason I'll leave you with, making sure we make time for this is you never know who is in your class and what kid is going to be sitting in your classroom in one of your seats that are one of these just unbelievable problem solvers, right? Because they're out there. I should have mentioned at the beginning, but if you joined us last month, Jamie did a webinar on creative thinking in math and science. So this is kind of the companion to that, with critical thinking in English language arts and social studies. And she brought up 3 examples of kids who have done major innovative things. And I was like, well, I'm going to find 3 more because you never know where these kids are coming from. So I just want to share with these, and they're so awesome. I actually printed out Cliff Notes because I want to make sure I get it right. But Anne here, she created a thermoelectric flashlight. So a flashlight that is powered by your own thermal energy. I mean, how brilliant is that? Kevin Doe here, he's from Sierra Leone, and he built a radio transmitter, generator, and even the batteries from scratch. And in his village, they couldn't afford electricity and the batteries. So this was a major thing for his village, and the neighbors come and charge their mobile phones at his place there. And then finally, Gitanjali, she was inspired by the Flint water crisis, those of you joining like I am in Michigan, and she created a way to send water quality information via Bluetooth. So at age 12, right? So I'm not saying that all your kids need to do something like that in order for you to be considered a worthy teacher. I'm just saying that kid might be in your classroom, and what are you doing? What am I doing to potentially inspire that kid who has that potential in my classroom? So for all those reasons, I think critical thinking is something that, like I said, we need to be obsessing over. We need to make sure we're building in time for it as much as we possibly can. So how do you do that? Let me share with you some strategies for ELA and social studies. So the first one gets at this very directly and very concretely, and it's just a strategy I call shallow and deep. and just utilizes this graphic organizer, and there is a link to that graphic organizer in the handout document. So if you didn't access that earlier, you can always check that out, and it should be in the chat there for you. And it's basically, think about anytime you would use a Venn diagram to compare and contrast. This is just a way to get a little bit deeper. How many of you have used a Venn diagram and you're just like not particularly satisfied with the answers that you get? This says, okay, what's this at the shallow end? Obvious similarities and obvious differences. And then at the deeper end, what are those not so obvious similarities, not so obvious differences? So this is just one of those examples of just asking them to go deeper, right? Sometimes we just need to give them the format that forces them to go a little bit deeper. So I want to give you a couple extra examples of what this looks like in ELA and social studies. So for ELA, this is more of an elementary example, but let's say you're having them compare and contrast Charlotte and Wilbur from Charlotte's Web. So those shallow end obvious similarities and differences might be they're both animals for similarities, or one is a spider and one is a pig. So sometimes in a Venn diagram, that might be as far as we get, or more, in the circles, but same type of content. But if we ask them, what are those not so obvious similarities, not so obvious differences? Well, not so obvious similarities, they're both kind and good-hearted. Or not so obvious differences is that Charlotte is wiser and Wilbur is friendlier, right? Kind of getting at a character trait. So you can see just sort of having a space to go deeper can force that little bit deeper conversation. What about something like this in social studies? Oftentimes we'll do the Venn diagram to compare and contrast World War I and World War II. And you might get, okay, similarities. They were both fought with multiple countries on each side. Or differences. One is this set of years to that set of years. Okay, but what about a less obvious similarity, like the concept of an alliance? That was in both of them. Or the fact that this was more about ideologies in World War II versus kind of more nationalism in World War I, right? So you kind of get a little bit deeper. Sometimes it's just asking them. So I love using this graphic organizer for that purpose. Another strategy is the infographic. So by asking students to make an infographic of whatever it is they're learning, it does a lot, right? First off, it does kind of unleash some creativity, which is always fun, but it forces them, because infographics, if you show them examples of them, many of them have a lot of data, right? There's percentages, there's graphs. So it forces them to get very analytical and find the evidence, which is something we're always trying to get them to do. Where is the evidence for that claim? So for example, one that I think would be really fun is if you're reading The Crossover, what do references to jazz and hip hop contribute to the novel as a whole? Create an infographic that explains your answer. So you could talk about, they could do a, percentage of times that there's references to jazz and hip hop. They could do all sorts of things, but it just focuses in on looking at it through a little bit different lens and with some more evidence-based information. How about like an early sort of more primary grade example where you're looking at roles and responsibilities? You could say, as a class, let's create an infographic that shows the roles and responsibilities of people in authority. So you could talk about the number of police officers or the number of nurses in your community. Like, you could do all sorts of things, and you could just sort of lead that in more of a pre-writing kind of stage for kids to where they come up with an infographic that really shows what they're talking about. So again, I love this for getting to think a little bit deeper with a little bit more evidence. This one's a really fun one, and it can scare some people, but that's okay. I like to be pushed out of my comfort zone personally, and if you're the same way, you might try these. And this is this idea of personification. So I'll show you some examples. So a really early L one might be with ELA, let's write a letter from the day of the week Friday to the day of the week Monday. What kind of letter would it be? So you're personifying the days of the week, thinking about what are the characteristics of a Friday? What are the characteristics of a Monday? And then once you have characteristics, you can apply those to a person. If a person had those characteristics, what would they say? Would it be a love letter? Would it be a mean girl letter? What would it be? And so I just think it's a fun way to think about really digging. You have to really hone in on what are the characteristics of that thing, and that's where the analytical thinking comes in. And then you have some creative thinking as a bonus into how they would communicate with one another. I really like this one too. This is more of a middle school, I think, example. But thinking in social studies, what would Napoleon Bonaparte think of the latest Spider-Man movie? So you're taking a historical figure and kind of personifying him into today's world, right? Write a review from his perspective. So you might imagine they would say something like, I admire Spider-Man's sense of ambition, how he always wanted to be a part of the action, right? Because again, they have to learn, dig deep into Napoleon's character in order to compare or think about what he might say about this movie review. Okay, ready for another one. Concept map revisited. So we all are familiar with a basic concept map. Think about what's here in blue, right? You take something with a concept web, idea web, whatever you want to call it. And then you have different ways you can branch out. What I'd like to do then is have, let's say that was with a, maybe a guided reading book and you kind of did main idea and details or something like that. Then have them go back and research something to get more of a nonfiction angle, and you can add that back to your concept map in a different color. So it's a way to sort of revisit the same information, but with a little bit more of an analytical thinking or critical thinking or extended kind of path to it. So for example, ELA, maybe now that we've created a story map about Frindle, think about other stories with a similar setting or similar characters. Add those to the map in a different color, right? So that's a way, not necessarily a nonfiction piece of it, although you could do that too. You could do like the making of the pen. But you could do anything else that you want to kind of extend that and then add it on to that map in a different color. It's a way to really add that critical thinking. Social studies example here, create a concept map showing causes of the American Revolution. Then consider if any of those causes are similar to issues of today. Add those to the map in a different color. So more of kind of, I would say, like middle school thinking here, where you're able to compare, what are those causes and do they relate to anything today? That's something you can put in a different color and really have a whole nother level of depth to that conversation and to that knowledge. All right, another one. This is the RAFT strategy. And this one has a handout to go with it as well in that HyperDoc handout. And this is an acronym for role, audience, format, and topic. So I like to use this to differentiate instruction as well, but it's just a way to help kind of think of things from a different angle, which always makes you think a little bit more critically about things. So you might assign, I like to do it where I assign the topic and I have students have choice in what role do they want to play. Are they a scientist? Are they a judge? Are they an athlete? And then who's their audience? They could pick, someone's on this list. They could be a judge presenting to a school. And then they can pick the format. Do they want to do a poem? Do they want to do a game? Do they want to do a brochure? And then, like I said, I like to provide the topic. So I'll give you some of the examples of that. This is one I've used a lot, which is you look at how is To Kill a Mockingbird relevant in today's society? Okay, so pretty basic question we might have, but let's get them thinking about this a little more critically by saying respond to that prompt from the perspective of one of the story characters. So they have to pick a character and understand how that character would respond, and then choose an audience that that character would likely present to. So if they chose Atticus, maybe it's then they're presenting to a jury. And then the format. What format would your character likely choose to present that information? So topic, you have that question there, and you could mix and match these all sorts of different ways. You could assign different role, audience, and format and topics to different groups to differentiate. Lots of different ways you can use that strategy. How about social studies? So here's an idea where the topic might be the role of competition in the determination of prices and wages in a market economy. And you just tell them, all right, what is the role of competition in determining those prices? Well, you choose a role, audience, and a format and just go, right? Whereas we kind of had a little bit more guided with the other example. Okay, I gave you 5 strategies with examples there. It's a lot to take in. I want to make sure this is useful for you. So take a moment to reflect on those and answer the poll. Which of those do you think you might try? There's the shallow and deep, that graphic organizer, the idea of having kids turn it into an infograph, that idea of, I think I call it personification there, but it's also inanimate letters or critics' choice. I sometimes use those interchangeably, that idea of personification. Then concept map, revisited, that idea of putting it in a different color, or the RAFT strategy. Let's see, Robin, let me know when the answers slow up and what the results are.
All right, I'm gonna get about 5 more seconds and we'll close it out. All right, that was maybe a little shy of 5 seconds, but here we go. So at the top, we have 56% for both shallow and deep and infographic, and then followed by 52% for personification or inanimate letters. 37% said RAFT, and then 30% said concept map.
Okay, very good. Hopefully you found at least one thing you can try in there. And hopefully those will kind of bring a little bit deeper thinking into your ELA and social studies. So I'll leave you here at the end with a few anytime strategies. Like I mentioned at the beginning, if you have just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, these are things that you can do to just build that culture of thinking, right? Where you value critical thinking and they know that's something that's important to you. So finding time to put in these things is really helpful. So I'll go through these really fast and get you out of here on time, I promise. So the first of these anytime strategies comes in the form of challenges. You could do the puzzle piece challenge. I get puzzle pieces from the dollar store. I hand the kids or have them pick a puzzle piece, and I just ask them, how does your puzzle piece relate to what it is we just learned today? So just sort of a random thing, and you'd be surprised, what they come up with. They can get really creative, but again, they have to really analyze something to give you a solid answer. Another challenge I'd like to give them is the 5-word challenge. And this is where you just ask them to summarize what we just learned in 5 words or less. They have to really think about what's important to cover in that 5 words, and also kind of creatively to think about how do I convey that in such a small amount of real estate, verbal real estate. Speaking of verbal, when we looked at challenges, now let's look at things that you can say. So I don't want to lose sight of the good old think aloud, right? Something we all kind of learned in school or maybe in pre-service, but maybe don't always do in practice. That idea of as you're reading, think aloud. What are you thinking? Model critical thinking. I wonder what that character is thinking, or I wonder what the character is going to do. I wonder what so-and-so will think about that particular action in the story. So use that think aloud. It really shows that you value thinking. And then sometimes we just need the words to ask, right? So some question stems here, and these are in your HyperDoc that will, if you get stuck and you want them to dig deeper, here's a few of those stems, right? Some of the ones I really like are just say more, or can you add to, or what would it be like to, right? You can kind of get them thinking about a different way to do something. So hopefully some of those question stems might help you with some things to say when that happens. All right, we all love games in the classroom, so a couple games here for you that really promote critical thinking. The good old mystery box. Just bring something, put it in a box, give the kids 20 questions to ask yes/no questions. You answer yes or no and see if they can deduct what's in the box by the time they get to the end of it. Just takes 5 minutes, but it just really engrosses them in their curiosity and thinking about how do I ask the right questions. So a lot of good critical thinking there. And then zoom in. This is always a nice way, again, 5-10 minutes. And I'll just give you an example of this so you kind of remember what it's like. But it's the idea of you zoom into a picture and you have the kids think about what could that possibly be. So if you're looking at this, what could this possibly be? If we were together, we'd be playing this, but just wanted to let you play along by yourself. Then you reveal a little bit more of the picture. Sometimes when I'm doing this, people think at this point that maybe it's like a hospital card. I've had that suggestion before. Then you get a little bit more of it, and then you finally get the reveal, right? So again, they're just having to process more and more information and add it to what they learned before. That process of critical thinking and additive thinking is a really good skill to reinforce. And then I have 2 last ones to leave you with, my little extra. One is called where not what. So if you are grading papers, this is going to be one that saves you time, which is always a winner too. Instead of saying what is wrong, just say where it's wrong and let them figure out what's wrong with it, right? They have to think a little bit harder. And then I want to direct you to, and the link is in the HyperDoc, but there are 4 mini lessons that we did recently that I think are really, really great for teaching information literacy, for being able to really discern whether a source is credible or not. So the first 2 are pretty quick. The second 2, lessons 3 and 4, take about anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much you want to go into depth, but they really do a great job of showing the kids why it's important to evaluate their sources. So some fun little games in there that you can access. All that's free. So just wanted to let you know about that as well. So, all right, one more poll here. Which of these will you try? Those challenges, like the puzzle piece challenge, the 5-word challenge, the things to say, like think alouds and question stems, games like mystery box or zoom in, and the little extra, that assessment hack with where not what, or the information literacy little mini lessons. We'll see what you guys are interested in.
All right, they are coming in here pretty quick. Give it a couple more seconds.
No worries.
All
I know
right.
I talk miles a minute on these things, but I have so much content to share.
You're good. All right, 64% games, 58% challenges, 48% things to say, and 21% a little extra.
Okay, so a little bit of love for each of those, but I'm glad to see games at the top. Don't we need a little more games right now? Just something to lighten things up a little bit. So excellent. I always think it's also nice to just show you a picture of what does success look like? What are you looking for, right? So if you implement some of these strategies in your classroom, whether they are the ones specific for ELA and social studies, or whether those anytime strategies, you know you're on the right path when your students are genuinely inquisitive. They're looking ahead and able to anticipate the consequences. When they're confident in their ability to reason. How many of those kids are like, I think it's this? When you see that confidence, you know you're on the right path. When they're honest about their own biases, when they're open to a variety of worldviews or being willing to change their mind, and reconsider and revise their views when that's warranted. So I just think it's nice to have that description as to where you're trying to get them to. So that's what I have for you. And I want to encourage you to join us next month. I'm really excited about, my colleague Dawn is putting this one together. It's Finding Your Heart, 7 Ways of Reclaiming Your Love for Teaching, which has been a little hard this year, let's be honest. So we thought this was a nice way to celebrate Valentine's Day by reclaiming your love for teaching. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that on Wednesday, February 16th. And last, I just want to say thank you again. I know it's tough out there. Hopefully these are strategies that were worth your time that you can do with your students. If you have any questions, you can find me. There's my email, tara.tarango@baei.org. And I also wanted to tell you, when you fill out a survey that's going to pop up as soon as you close out of the webinar, it'll launch a survey. It's super, super short, but it gives us a lot of great information on what is important to you and what is helpful to you. And we want to make sure your time is valuable. So please take that survey. And when you do, you'll be entered to win. Remember those Blue Apple projects that I talked about at the beginning? We're going to pick 3 winners to get all the supplies you need to do one of these project-based learning units with your students. So we'll pick those winners on January 24th. So thank you so much. Like I said, I really appreciate all you do for your students, and hopefully you've got a class of critical thinkers that really bring you a lot of joy. So have a good night, everybody. I'll see you next month.